At a family brunch, my parents suggested you should let your sister use your savings to buy a bigger house. You're not using it anyway. I refused, but a few days later, I found out they had tried to access my bank account. What happened next when I froze their accounts left them speechless. I grew up watching my little sister, Sophie, get whatever she wanted. She was the kind of kid who would spend every dollar she had, knowing someone would come along and bail her out. My parents encouraged it. Whenever she ran out of money, they'd step in, tell her it was okay, and cover whatever she needed. Meanwhile, I was different. I saved every penny. I planned ahead. I worked hard in school, got scholarships, and landed a stable job as a software engineer in Seattle. I lived within my means. I didn't buy luxury items, didn't splurge on vacations, didn't waste money. Sophie, on the other hand, got married young, had 2 kids, and was constantly complaining about how hard life was. She and her husband, Mark, lived in a tiny 2-bedroom house, drowning in debt, yet still spent money like it was water. Every few months, she'd come to me with a new sob story, hinting that I should help. I never gave her a cent. Then came the brunch. It was a typical Sunday gathering at a cafe in Capitol Hill. Me, Sophie, our parents, and Mark. We were eating, chatting, everything was normal, until my mom casually dropped the bomb. You should let Sophie use your savings to buy a bigger house, she said, stirring her coffee like she hadn't just said something insane. I actually laughed. What? You don't have kids, my dad chimed in. You live in an apartment. You don't need that much money. I stared at them, waiting for the punchline. But they were dead serious. It wouldn't be all your money, Sophie added quickly. Just enough for a down payment. We'd pay you back. Mark, who rarely spoke, nodded. It would really help. I put my fork down. Let me get this straight. You all think I should hand over my savings money I worked for, so Sophie can buy a bigger house. Mom sighed, like I was being unreasonable. It's not like you're using it. Family helps family. No, I said immediately. That's not happening. Their faces dropped. Don't be selfish, Dad snapped. It's just sitting there. It's sitting there because it's my money, I shot back. I worked for it. I saved it. I planned for my future. You don't get to decide what I do with it. The tension at the table was suffocating. Sophie's face turned red. Mark looked away. My mom muttered something about how I should think about the kids. I wasn't going to be guilt-tripped. I've already made my decision, I said. And the answer is no. Brunch ended soon after that. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. A few days later, I was going through my usual morning routine, coffee, emails, checking my bank accounts. That's when I saw something strange. 3 failed login attempts. I froze. I knew for a fact that wasn't me. I hadn't mistyped my password 3 times. My stomach dropped. I immediately called my bank. After verifying my identity, I asked if they could see where the login attempts came from. The woman on the other end hesitated. They were from an IP address linked to. She paused. Then she read out an address. My parents' address. My heart stopped. They had actually tried to access my savings. I gripped the phone. You're telling me that someone at that address tried to get into my account 3 times? Yes, she confirmed. I was shaking. I thanked her, hung up, and sat there, staring at the screen. Then, something inside me snapped. They weren't going to get away with this. I immediately called my bank back. I need to lock my account down completely, I said. Maximum security. No one accesses it except me. Within minutes, they enabled every possible safeguard. 2-factor authentication. Phone call verifications. A security lockout for any suspicious attempts. Then, I did the same for my investment accounts. And finally, I called my credit card companies and told them to alert me if anyone tried to open a new line of credit in my name. If my family was desperate enough to try this once, I wasn't going to give them a second chance. Then, I took it a step further. For years, I had helped my parents manage their finances. When my dad retired early, I set up their online banking and automated their bills. I knew all their accounts. I had access to everything. And now? I used that access to freeze every single one of them. Checking? Frozen. Savings? Locked. Credit cards? Flagged for fraud protection. They couldn't touch a dime. And I waited. It took 2 hours before my phone rang. First, it was my dad. Why the hell can't I access my bank account? He barked. I stayed calm. Oh, you mean, like how I couldn't access mine when you tried to steal from me? Silence. Then my mom called, her voice panicked. Honey, there must be a mistake. We can't get into our accounts. I didn't even try to hold back my anger. Yeah, that's because I locked them down. Just like you tried to do to me. More silence. Then Sophie called. I didn't know they were going to do that, she said quickly. I swear. I thought they were just checking. I laughed bitterly. Checking my account? Without my permission? That's stealing, Sophie. I didn't think that's the problem. I cut her off. You never think. She started crying. I didn't care. I wasn't done. For years, I had managed their bills. Now, I transferred everything back to them. Mortgage, utilities, credit card payments, all in their hands now. Then, I withdrew my access completely. I'm done managing your money, I texted my dad. You want to steal from me? Figure it out yourself. My mom begged. We don't know how to do this. We'll miss payments. I sent one final text. Then maybe should have thought about that before trying to rob me. I turned off my phone. Let them panic. After shutting them out of their own finances, I expected a storm. What I didn't expect was how far they would go. For 2 days, my phone blew up with calls and texts. My dad left angry voicemails, demanding I fix what I had done. My mom sent guilt-tripping messages about how I was hurting the family. Sophie just cried and begged me to reconsider. I ignored them all. By day 3, they realized I wasn't budging. That's when the real desperation kicked in. I was in the middle of work when an unknown number called. Normally, I'd ignore it, but something told me to pick up. Hello? Is this my name? A man's voice asked. Yes, who's this? This is Detective Harris with the Seattle Police Department. I sat up straight. Okay. We received a report that you've been committing financial abuse against your parents. My blood turned to ice. What? I said slowly, trying to process the words. They claim you took control of their finances and are preventing them from accessing their own money. I almost laughed. Almost. Sir, I didn't steal anything, I said. I was managing their accounts with their permission. And I stopped when they tried to steal from me. There was a pause. Then, would you be willing to come in and give a statement? Oh, I was more than willing. I took the rest of the day off and marched straight to the police station. When I got there, I was met by a middle-aged officer who led me to a small, gray-walled room. He had a file in his hands, my parents' accusations written inside. I laid out everything. The brunch, the attempted bank theft, the proof from my bank, the fact that I had been the one helping them with their finances for years. The officer listened carefully, occasionally writing notes. When I was done, he nodded. They didn't mention the bank login attempts, he said. Of course they didn't. I pulled out my phone. I have proof. The bank confirmed the login attempts came from their address. He took my phone, scrolled through the evidence, and sighed. Yeah, this doesn't look good for them. I sat back in my chair. So, what happens now? Well, he said, closing the file, I don't see any actual crime here, at least, not on your end. If anything, this could be considered a fraudulent police report. My heart pounded. They lied to the police? I asked. Pretty much, he said. And that's a crime. I didn't press charges. Yet. But I did make sure my parents knew exactly what they had done. When I got home, I sent them a single text. I just spoke to the police. They know you lied. Keep pushing, and you'll be the ones in legal trouble. Silence. Then, a few minutes later, my dad sent a simple reply. We didn't mean for it to go this far. I rolled my eyes. They absolutely did. And they weren't done yet. A week passed with no contact. I thought maybe, just maybe, they had finally backed off. I was wrong. I came home one evening and found an official-looking letter in my mailbox. At first, I thought it was junk mail. Then I saw the return address. It was from a lawyer. I ripped it open. Inside was a letter from my parents' attorney, claiming I had taken unlawful control of their accounts and demanding I return all misappropriated funds, which, to be clear, was $0, or they would take legal action. I laughed. Out loud. They were actually trying to sue me. I wasted no time. I called my own lawyer, a woman named Lisa who didn't take nonsense from anyone. She read the letter and shook her head. This is ridiculous, she said. They have no case. If anything, this is harassment. What do I do? I asked. She smirked. We could countersue. Emotional distress, defamation, filing false reports, there's plenty we could hit them with. I hesitated. I didn't want to drag this into a full-blown legal war. But at the same time, they needed to understand that I wasn't someone they could bully. Draft a response, I said. Make it clear that if they push this, we will countersue. Lisa got to work. 2 days later, we sent an official response to their lawyer. It was cold, professional, and terrifying. It detailed how I had never stolen a single cent. How I had proof they attempted to access my accounts without permission. How I had spoken to the police and they were aware of my parents' false report. How I was prepared to take legal action if they didn't drop this immediately. We sent the letter. And we waited. It didn't take long. 2 days after the letter was delivered, my dad called. I let it go to voicemail. A few hours later, I got a text. We're dropping everything. Let's just move on. No apology. No acknowledgement of what they had done. Just an attempt to sweep it under the rug. I didn't respond. They had made their choice. And now? They were going to live with the consequences. After my parents finally backed off, I thought it was over. They had dropped the fake lawsuit, the police knew the truth, and I had completely removed myself from their financial mess. For the first time in weeks, I felt at peace. But then, just when I thought they had learned their lesson, they pulled one last desperate move, one that nearly cost me everything. I was at work, debugging some code, when my phone rang. It was from an unknown number. Normally, I ignore those, but after everything that had happened, I had a bad feeling. I picked up. Hello, this is Sarah from First National Bank. Am I speaking with my name? Yes, this is me, I said cautiously. She hesitated. I'm calling to confirm a large withdrawal request from your account. Since it's outside your usual activity, we wanted to verify before proceeding. My blood ran cold. What request? I asked, my voice tight. One moment, let me check the details, she said, clicking away on her keyboard. Yes. A wire transfer request for $25,000 submitted earlier today. It was requested through an in-person visit at one of our local branches. I felt dizzy. I never made that request. I gripped my phone. Which branch? The downtown Seattle location, she said. A woman claiming to be you came in with identification. I shot up from my desk. Stop the transfer, I said firmly. That's fraud. I didn't authorize anything. I heard her typing again. Understood. I'll cancel the transaction and flag your account for fraudulent activity. I also strongly recommend coming in to update your security measures. Yeah, I'll be there today, I said, already grabbing my keys. And one more thing, what ID did they use? There was a pause. Then she said, a driver's license with your name and information, but the photo didn't quite match. That's why we flagged it. My stomach dropped. Someone had used a fake ID with my information. By the time I got to the bank, I was shaking with anger. A manager met me in a private office. She pulled up the security footage from earlier that day. And when she turned the screen toward me, I froze. It wasn't my mom. It wasn't Sophie. It was a stranger. A woman in her mid-40s, wearing sunglasses, hair tied back, dressed in a casual blazer. She looked nothing like me, but the ID must have been convincing enough to at least raise questions. Who is that? I muttered, completely thrown off. The manager shook her head. We don't know, but she left when we told her we needed additional verification. We have her on camera, though. If you want to file a police report, oh, I do, I said immediately. I wasn't just dealing with greedy family members anymore. Someone had tried to steal my identity. After filing the report, I started to piece things together. Whoever this woman was, she had my information. My full name, address, banking details, and enough personal information to attempt a withdrawal. And there were only a few people who had access to all of that. I went through every possible scenario in my head. Then it clicked. My parents. More specifically, my dad. See, my dad had an old habit when he needed something done, but didn't want to get his hands dirty, he'd find someone else to do it. He had used this trick with sketchy contractors, unlicensed workers, and even when borrowing money. This had his fingerprints all over it. I didn't text. I didn't call. I showed up. That evening, I drove to my parents' house, my heart pounding the entire way. When my dad opened the door, he actually had the nerve to look surprised. My name? What are you doing here? I stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. We need to talk, I said, my voice cold. Who did you send to the bank with a fake ID? His face twitched, and for a brief moment, I saw something flicker in his expression. Panic. What? My mom asked, stepping into the room. I turned to her. Someone tried to take $25,000 from my account today. At a bank. Using my identity. Mom gasped, putting a hand over her mouth. But Dad? He just sighed. Like he was annoyed that I had caught him. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, walking toward the kitchen like this was some casual misunderstanding. I followed him. Then why did the bank call me? I snapped. Why do they have security footage of some random woman using my information? Dad grabbed a glass from the cabinet and poured himself water, completely calm. Maybe someone hacked you, he said. I laughed. A sharp, humorless sound. Or, I said, stepping closer, maybe you got one of your old buddies to do it for you. Dad took a sip of water and shrugged. That's a serious accusation, he said, still not meeting my eyes. Yeah? I crossed my arms. So is attempted identity theft. Which, by the way, is a felony. That got his attention. His hand tightened around the glass. My mom finally spoke, her voice shaking. You're not saying your father did this? I turned to her. Who else would know my banking details? My security questions? My information? Her face drained of color. And that's when I knew. She didn't know. This wasn't one of their joint plans. This was all my dad. The room was silent for a long time. Then my mom turned to my dad, voice dead serious. Tell me you didn't. Dad didn't answer. He just put down the glass and stared at the floor. And that was all the confirmation I needed. I took a deep breath. Here's what's going to happen, I said, voice calm but firm. I'm filing a full police report. The bank already has the footage. They're going to track down that woman. Dad looked up sharply. You don't have to do that. Yes, I said, I do. Mom looked between us, horrified. You can't do this. He's your father. No, I said, shaking my head. Fathers don't try to steal from their own kids. And with that, I turned and walked out. I didn't look back. But I knew. This wasn't over. I left my parents' house that night feeling something I hadn't felt before. Not just anger. Not just betrayal. Something final. Like whatever was left of our relationship had just snapped. For the next few days, I kept waiting for the next blow. A text. A phone call. Some desperate excuse. But my phone stayed silent. It wasn't like them. My parents had always been the type to fight back, to justify, to manipulate. But now? Nothing. Which meant something worse was coming. It came the following weekend. I had just gotten back from running errands when my phone buzzed. A text from my cousin, Jake. Jake, you need to get over here. Right now. I frowned. Over where? Me. What's going on? Jake, your mom just showed up at Grandma's house. She's crying. She said your dad did something horrible. She won't say what, but she keeps saying she never knew. My stomach twisted. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to my grandmother's house. When I walked in, the room fell silent. My mom was sitting on the couch, shaking. Her face was blotchy from crying, hands gripping a crumpled tissue. My grandmother sat beside her, lips pressed in a tight line. Jake was standing by the fireplace, arms crossed. His eyes flicked to me, and he gave a small nod. This was about me. I closed the door behind me. What's going on? Mom lifted her head. Her eyes so full of guilt, shame, something else locked onto mine. And then she said the words that would change everything. Your father has been stealing from us for years. At first, I didn't understand. What do you mean? I asked, voice sharp. She let out a shaky breath. He's been taking money. From our accounts. From Sophie. Even from me. A cold chill ran through me. Grandma spoke next, her voice tight. Your mother found out this morning. She was trying to pay a bill and saw thousands missing. She confronted him, and, well, he admitted it. I could barely process what I was hearing. So, this wasn't just about me? Mom shook her head quickly. No, it's been going on for years. I had no idea. I trusted him. Her voice cracked. I feel so stupid. She wasn't the only one. Sophie, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, finally spoke. He maxed out one of my credit cards, she muttered. I thought it was Mark, but she swallowed. It was Dad. A slow, horrifying realization hit me. This wasn't just about my bank account. This wasn't just about him trying to steal from me. He had been doing it to all of us. For years. I didn't wait. I turned, walked straight out the door, and drove back to my parents' house. I barely knocked before pushing the door open. My dad was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee like his world wasn't on fire. He didn't look surprised to see me. I slammed the door behind me. Tell me it's not true. He sighed. You talked to your mother. Of course I did. My hands were shaking. You've been stealing from us? From her? From Sophie? He didn't even flinch. It's not what you think, he said. I let out a sharp laugh. Oh, it's exactly what I think. You took money from us. You tried to steal from me. You even roped in a stranger to commit identity fraud. For the first time, I saw something flash in his expression. Panic. Fear. You don't have proof of that, he muttered. I stepped closer. The bank has security footage. The police have a report. Do you really want to test me? He clenched his jaw. I was trying to fix things. I froze. Fix things. I repeated, voice eerily calm. He sighed again, rubbing a hand over his face. We're broke, he muttered. Your mother doesn't know how bad it is. He hesitated. I made some bad investments. I thought I could fix it before anyone noticed. I stared at him, feeling something snap inside me. This isn't a mistake, I said. This isn't something you fix. You stole from your own family. He exhaled through his nose, as if I was the one being unreasonable. It's not that simple. I shook my head. It is. And you know what? I'm done. He frowned. What do you mean? I took a deep breath. I mean, I'm done with you. With Mom. With Sophie. With all of this. His face darkened. You don't mean that. I held his gaze. I do. I pulled out my phone. And just so we're clear, I'm pressing charges. For the first time, real fear crossed his face. Wait, I turned and walked out the door. I didn't look back. A week later, I followed through on my promise. I pressed identity theft charges against my father. The bank cooperated fully, handing over footage and documentation. My mother? She filed for divorce. She never spoke to me directly again, but I heard through Jake that she moved in with my grandmother after everything fell apart. Sophie and I had one last conversation. She called me crying, saying she didn't know what to do, that our family was broken. I told her it was broken long before this. And then I hung up. I moved. New city, new job, new life. For a long time, I felt guilt. Not for what I did, but for how things had turned out. I had spent so many years thinking my family was just a little messy. But the truth? They had been rotten from the start. Now, years later, I still don't talk to them. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice. But then I look at my bank account, my peaceful apartment, and the calm I finally feel. And I know I did.